Hey guys, it's Cece, and it is time for another monthly recommendations video. Monthly Recommendations was a group created by Trina from Between Chapters and Kayla from Kayla Rain, and I will leave the links to both of their channels as well as the Goodreads group for monthly recommendations down below, and you can go and check them out. The point of monthly recommendations, if you haven't watched the previous monthly recommendations videos that I've done, is that we just get a theme every month and we can choose as many books as we want or as few books as we want to recommend to you to go along with that theme. This is just a video that I love to do. This is a video that you guys clearly love. I always get a lot of really positive reactions to my monthly recommendations videos, so I love doing this series and I'm going to continue to do it, and yeah. Let's just get started. This month's theme is Not Another Love Story, which basically means, you know, non-romantic books, romance alternatives, books that just don't have a lot of romance in them, which can be a little bit hard to find, but sometimes, especially, I definitely find this, I get a little bogged down in romantic books. And so it can be nice to kind of break free from that and read a book that is about more than just a romance. So I have sort of 8 different genres, and I'm going to recommend to you 8 books. So I'm going to try to give you as varied a possible collection of books that are non-romantic, and you can kind of pick and choose the genres that you really love. I really tried to get a bit of everything in here. So I hope that I've done well, and we're going to start right off talking about a horror recommendation. The book that I'd like to recommend as a horror romance alternative is The Long Walk by Richard Bachman, aka Stephen King. This book is a horror book, but it also, I would say, can fall under the dystopian heading. It is mainly horror, but it does take place in the future with in a dystopian society, and is easily my favorite Stephen King book that I've read so far, besides The Green Mile. This book, to sum it up quickly, follows a race that is held where 100 young boys show up, and they just have to walk. And the last person standing gets this huge reward for their family, and if you stop walking, there are incredibly dire consequences. This book is super suspenseful, super creepy, and definitely kept me up all night reading. It is a fantastic book, especially if you love dystopian, and it is definitely one that will chill you. So if you're looking for a book that's not going to have a lot of romance and is also going to scare your pants off, The Long Walk is your book. Next, I want to recommend some adult literary fiction, and for that I'm going to talk about The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. This book, I have just barely talked about it in my Top 5 Wednesday about my top 5 non-YA books, but I'm going to quickly summarize it again. This book follows a character named Margaret, and she is called by a recluse author named Vita Winter to write Vita's biography. So Margaret goes to talk to Vita and finds out more about her background, which is creepy and gothic and very dark, but definitely pulls Margaret into this mystery and connects her to the story as well. This is a great book for those who love reading. It is just beautifully written. While there is a small amount of romance at the end, it's not even really noticeable, and is mainly about the intertwining stories of these two women, Margaret and Vita. It's just beautifully written, one that I have really loved in the past, and so I highly recommend it. Next up, a non-fiction recommendation, and the one I'm going to recommend is The Devil in the White City by Erik Larsen. This book follows 2 intertwining narratives as well, one about the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, and the other about legendary serial killer H.H. Holmes, who lived in Chicago at the time. This book does a really good job of talking about how the World's Fair was created, all of the work that led to it being built, as well as some of the stuff that was happening very close at the time that just nobody was aware of. Information about H.H. Holmes is very chilling and can be a bit creepy. It is about a serial killer, so you should know that going in, but it is a great book and a great intertwining narrative nonfiction book that I think is very well written. Next up, some YA contemporary that is light on the romance. I'm going to be recommending Me and Earl and the Dying Girl by Jessie Andrews. This book is obviously romance light, and the book frequently makes a point of saying that there is not really any romance involved. This book follows a guy named Greg, as well as his best friend Earl, and a girl that Greg knows, Rachel, who is dying of cancer. And it just follows him becoming friends with her as she's getting more and more sick, but it is a very funny book. It brings humor to a very dark situation, and is just a different version of the story than I've seen, with sort of the one person is dying, so the other person has to fall in love with them narrative. It's very different than that. It is more about friendship than romance. The book has a very interesting format. Sometimes it is written in script form, sometimes it is written as bullet-pointed lists, and is one that you can get through very, very quickly. So if you're looking for a YA contemporary that is light on the romance, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. Next up, a graphic novel I would like to recommend to you, This One Summer by Jillian and Mariko Tamaki. This is a book that I read last year, and it was one of my favorite books of the year, and I think that it is just a fantastic story. This book mainly tells the story of one girl who goes to the same kind of beach house kind of place every summer and stays there with her family, and she has one friend there named Wendy who she only sees every summer, and they've been really good friends for years, but now that they are growing up, some stuff is kind of pulling them apart, and they're both changing and maturing as they become teenagers and, you know, grow up. So this book is about growing up. It is about the relationship between these two girls. It is about someone's first crush, but it is in no way a romance. It is a kind of crush from afar that isn't discussed as much as the relationship that the lead character has with her parents and with her friend. And this is just a beautiful book about growing up and about being a girl, and I absolutely loved it. Okay, it is time for me to recommend to you a thriller, and that thriller is Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. I knew I had to recommend a Gillian Flynn book, and this is definitely one that is lightest on the romance. I would say that Sharp Objects and Gone Girl don't necessarily have... Sharp Objects does. Gone Girl doesn't necessarily have a romance, but it does have more of those elements. Dark Places is pretty much free of romance, and it follows this girl named Libby Day, and when she was quite young, her whole family was brutally murdered, and she's been led to believe her whole life that her brother is the one who committed this murder, until a sort of serial killer group comes forward and tells her that they think that it might not be her brother, and so she kind of has to reconsider her past in this incredibly dark day, and it follows her narrative in the future, as well as the night that her whole family was murdered when she was, like, really young, I think like 6. It's a fantastic book, very dark, very creepy, very Gillian Flynn, with her kind of messed up female characters and just creepy, creepy narrative. I highly recommend this book if you are new to Gillian Flynn, or if you love Gillian Flynn, or if you love thrillers, or if you just like really creepy, excellent writing. It is a fantastic book. For fantasy, I am going to be recommending A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. Now this book isn't necessarily a novel, it is a very, very short book that is young adult, I believe. It is mostly categorized as young adult. I've seen a few people say middle grade. But it is just a fantastic, emotional book. It is about a young boy who is dealing with something very serious in his life, and he doesn't really know how to process the emotions that he is going through with that event, and so a monster kind of shows up and kind of helps him to deal with that. I don't want to offer a lot of explanation for this book because it is really good to go in blind and kind of learn about it, but I will say that this book is highly emotional. I cried for half of the book. It has a lot of emotion running through it and is very, very excellent, but while there is absolutely no romance, there are a lot of other high emotions. And I think that it is probably going to be one of my favorite books this year. It was a beautiful book, so I would definitely recommend that. But as a warning, you're probably gonna cry. And finally, coming in at the end, I would like to recommend a science fiction book, and the book that I'm going to be recommending is The Martian by Andy Weir. This book follows astronaut Mark Watney, and he and his team are on Mars, and then a horrible storm happens and his whole team leaves, leaving him behind, assuming he is dead. And it is about Mark Watney trying to survive on Mars for just an insane amount of time until he can hopefully be rescued, or if another team is going to come to Mars, which won't be for like 4 years of time. This is such a funny book considering how fast-paced and thrilling it is. The hallmark of the book is definitely the humor. Mark Watney has this amazing sense of gallows humor that just keeps the book really bouncing along and makes all of the darker stuff that happens a bit lighter and easier to deal with. It is heavy on the science, but it doesn't feel info dumpy. It just kind of, it's his thought processes because he is the narrator of the book. It is a fantastic book, one that I highly recommend, one that I absolutely loved last year, and Mark Watney has no time for romance up on Mars. He is up there alone. So, there you go. Those are my monthly recommendations. If you have read any of these books, please let me know what you thought of them down below. I hope that I've recommended something great to you. If there is a book that you have read that is light on the romance, let me know what it is. I'd be curious because I, as I mentioned, do sometimes get a little bogged down in romance in books, and I like to branch out a bit more. So let me know some of your recommendations, and thank you so much for watching. I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!